Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining us on the PlaceOS podcast. So you're at Monstarlab. So maybe just start with what you do there and your role.
Jon, thanks so much for having me. My name is Matt Knuti. Everyone just calls me Knuti. I'm the VP of Engagement in Monstarlab Americas, overseeing our largest accounts. And Monstarlab is a global consultancy headquartered in Tokyo that offers a variety of digital transformation services around the world.
Yeah, we've been working together on smart building projects, and I've been aware of Monstar Labs for quite some time. We collaborated early on when it was under a different brand name before it was acquired. So what's been the journey for you for smart buildings? I know Monster Labs is a full service creative agency and digital agency. How did it transition into working on smart building projects?
We have had a focus in hospitality for a long time. And as we developed that calling card in the market, um, places started to come to us at thinking more holistically about how to incorporate digital hospitality into things like stadiums and office buildings. And they saw our expertise in interface design and physical and digital experiences in the hospitality space, especially in our early days in food ordering, and thought, I guess these guys could probably do some of this magic for us in our building. And so that opened doors for us for places like Tishman Speyer, the real estate company, and doing work on stadiums and with some very interesting clients with you as well.
I think that's very topical. Hospitality in the area that we do a lot of work at PlaceOS is workplace and smart workplace. And if you read any articles today about what is a workplace post-COVID and return to work, the word hospitality gets thrown around quite a lot. Hospitality-like experiences to attract employees back to the workplace. And for a long time, we've used hospitality language in workplace projects, such as hoteling, for example, as a way of describing how things can be dynamically assigned. And I like this idea of learning from one industry and applying it to another. And right now is perfect timing to take anything you've learned from hospitality and apply it to workplace.
I think that's very true. And one thing that we try to bring from our hospitality experience is a user centric approach to thinking about what the user needs are and how that can then deliver business value. And I think that plays out in the return to office in the sense that so many workplaces are trying to think about how to lure their employees back. I mean, the shoe is really on the other foot in a lot of ways. And so as offices are retooled to be more attractive spaces for collaboration and free form gathering as opposed to desk work, there are a variety of digital services and things that enable those experiences that I think start to come into play, from the change in the way that you are booking those spaces to the services that you want around them. I mean, we certainly do a good deal of food ordering, and I think the demand for catering services has increased significantly. And
Yeah.
I think, we see that in our own collaborations.
Yeah, and it's more available to every type of workplace. I think is a trend I'm seeing where hospitality experiences in workplace was almost exclusively the large, shiny business consulting firms or accounting firms, such as our clients like PwC, have always had in-house catering for their meeting rooms, which is a luxury that not everybody has. I think the difference now is people looking at clever ways to bring a catering-like experience to their space, which might be integrating into retail that's within the precinct, making retail essentially like as if you have in-house catering. And I say that's where I've always had the idea of what you guys have done with food ordering, particularly the project you did with one of the large burger franchises.
Shake Shack.
Shake Shack, one of the best burgers I've ever had, and seeing how that experience is so seamless. Like it's better using the app than going to the person in some ways, or using kiosks at places, but like allowing that to be available not just to the people in the physical location, but perhaps the workplace is nearby where that Shake Shack could be delivered to their desk or something like that, has always been back of mind of how do we enable retail to get access to the 5,000 employees upstairs.
And I think it's an opportunity, and it's driven by ever rising expectations. Across the board, people are used to the convenience of Uber Eats and Deliveroo and all of the other platforms that make those things push button. And suddenly, your small, medium, or even large size business is being saddled with these expectations that people have from startups that have been burning all of this capital to build audiences and extraordinary technology. And so it really requires some creativity to bring those experiences to a variety of different budgets. And it really helps to have a platform that accelerates you forward and skips a couple of those initial steps so that you can get into building out use cases rather than investing in just the foundations and
Mhm.
finding that you barely have money to innovate beyond that.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to smart buildings, one of the pieces to sort of make this experience seamless or to make it similar to some of these Uber Eats like experience is location services.
Mm.
Because if we integrate into a location service or multiple location services in a building, so we know where, if it's a workplace, where the employees are, we can have services delivered to them automatically. In the same way that Uber Eats knows where my house is and can deliver services to me automatically. So it's looking at those opportunities of what can we do now that we know at all times where this person happens to be, and what are the the ripple effects, sort of privacy concerns around this as well. Always needs to be considered. But I always say in sort of in our scoping meetings, we're basically looking for two things: a record of truth to tell us who the user is, and a location service to tell us where they are. Everything else can be triggered in context to those two things, and that essentially is what a smart building is.
And I think that location awareness, the importance of that for security and safety in a kind of, I don't know whether we can call this a post-pandemic era, but I think that we're all coming to terms with the idea that some of the pandemic concerns around space utilization and cleaning protocols need to be things that we can turn on and off again. And I think that requires an investment so that we know that we can, when circumstances change, have a good sense of, what space is occupied and when we need to send in a cleaning crew.
And if that's the catalyst for enabling such a feature, the ripple effect is that it can also be used for other user experiences that maybe are not as important but are nice to have. So if we enable dynamic tracking for cleaning and for biosafety, then we can use it for other things that are nicer features, not necessarily response to pandemics. And I feel there's been a bit of a trend and a shift, I should say, where I used to be careful talking about integrating into tracking people in a building. I guess I still am, but I feel that people are more open to people tracking in, particularly in workplaces, where it used to be a sort of touchy subject, where now it's almost expected. I feel maybe there's a shift since COVID where they sort of expect to be tracked in some way in the workplace. This is an area we could talk a lot about on its own because the privacy is something to consider. What we like to do at PlaceOS is not really introduce anything new, but leverage what's already happening in that building. So if we can integrate with Wi-Fi, for example, we can track where devices are. That's already happening. We're not adding that. We're maybe just making people aware that it's happening.
Do you see differences in different markets in terms of the evolution of the willingness to go for tracking?
Yeah, 100%. You could guess which markets are more sensitive to this, but where there's stronger privacy laws and guidelines, there's definitely more awareness at the individual level in meetings. So across Europe, because they have GDPR, it's one of the first things they bring up, and that's where I'm still. We don't have to track people. There's still value in a integration platform to solve other problems. Knowing where people are is a great way to dynamically control the building. Doesn't always have to be at an individual level. We don't need to know where Matthew Knuti is. We might just need to know where everybody is, so we can control the air conditioning more dynamically. And that's where we take the privacy design and look at, well, what technology achieves the goal but doesn't introduce any privacy concerns. So I guess the trick up our sleeve is we don't depend on any one method, because we're not selling you like a desk sensor or a camera. We sell a platform that can integrate with a desk sensor or a camera, so you can choose those technologies if needed, or just design it in a way that's suitable to you, or forget about location tracking altogether if it's too hard or too much of a concern for your employees.
That scalable approach to location awareness, I think, is really powerful, and it allows for kind of the softer edges of location awareness, or the softer approaches, to still provide a lot of the value to users. Honestly, I think the energy usage value proposition is huge. That we all are becoming more and more conscious of our energy usage, and we want to find ways, I think, to help. And if the building knows which rooms are occupied and can adjust the AC down or up so that you're not overburning,
yeah,
that's just magic.
And that's I hate to use phrases like that, but like this, but that's low hanging fruit, right? So if we're tracking people, and we're connected to the building systems such as the air conditioning or the heating, we can control that dynamically based on what's going on. If there's no one there, turn it off. If there's lots of people there, turn it up. That's something that at scale adds a lot of efficiencies. So if we do this for an organization with 190 sites, then the cost benefit of that is huge. The other side of that, there's a lot of talk about, we've already mentioned this, about incentivizing people to come back to the office. One of the main incentives that commercial buildings have is high quality air, and comfortable environment. So it's usually better than what most people have at home. So going to the office, you can have a more comfortable and high quality environment. So it's monitored and controlled, the humidity levels and the CO2 levels, and it's all filtered air. So there's no pollution. So that's like an incentive for the physical workplace, is how it's efficient and how comfortable it is. And there's a lot of opportunity for anyone working in smart buildings right now, because energy is now being mandated. Energy requirements are now mandated in many markets, including where you are in New York with Local Law 97, which mandates basically the consumption of every commercial building. And if you don't comply, you have to slap a rating up on your front door saying this building's a D. And nobody wants to have like a D-rated building. They want like an A-rated building. In the near future, that's actually going to, if you're not complying, you get fined per square foot of non-compliance. So it's going to be a huge financial impact. And these little efficiencies can be part of the solution.
And I think that compliance challenge is increasingly multidimensional. I mean, we see in Spain, I think last week, they're mandating that the air conditioning be set at 27 degrees or above. So if you want to adhere with that, you may need to do it manually, or it would be great to have PlaceOS, and everyone is short-staffed, especially buildings and multi-use spaces. So having automation is increasingly, I think, necessary to meet labor constraints.
I think the market is changing and shifting again, because there's more of an understanding that there's a need for automation for user experiences, not necessarily buttons and apps. And the best solution is a combination, the right interface for the right place and the right time and the right person. But often in previous projects we've worked on, the automation component gets missed. We have this great little feature called triggers. It's in our admin interface. And I look at a lot of our clients and they haven't added a single trigger. So a trigger is basically a conditional logic that you can set yourself if you're an admin user. If this happens with this input, trigger this action on this output. So that could be location triggering air conditioning, exactly what we've been talking about. Um, but unless it's in an app, a lot of our clients aren't using it. So I've seen this shift in recent times, in the last year or so, where we're even doing projects where there is no app, there is no interface. It's purely just PlaceOS connecting to things and providing a layer of automation. So I think that is going to help the and maybe you can comment on this. Like I'm seeing a bit of a shift away from like post mobile and not everything being an app. So have you seen a similar trend, and how does an agency that builds apps adapt to that?
I think you hit on something there, which is that the best interface really is no interface. Um, Ideally, you wouldn't have to push any buttons. A system would just know what you want and deliver that to you. So while app building is, I think, crucial for a lot of use cases, can deliver a lot of value, we see the technology infrastructure that we build for our clients, the backends and the APIs that integrate their systems, and the analytics and data analysis that tell us, what those systems should do and at what time, allow us to create experiences that are interfaceless, that know, when people are coming in the morning. I mean, we work with a leading consulting firm together, and the blinds should just go up when you are in the office according to your calendar. There's no need for me to press a button or to pull out an app. I mean, there are a lot of cases where an app is worse than a button on the wall. That's just easier. But it may be that an app is an intermediate stage to figuring out the truly interfaceless innovation. I think in cases where we can, we're trying to leapfrog people there right away.
I think the hard part of the appless experience is selling it internally, particularly for workplaces that have a large stakeholder group. How do they have meetings where they explain automation without showing something? And when it's app development, people can draw things and say, this is how it's going to look. And everyone in the meeting, maybe the executive group that have to sponsor this project, can be like, "Oh, that's great. That looks great. It's got our logo on it. So let's go ahead with that project." So I think there are some challenges that are just in the nature of the way these projects run. Even an appetite for agile development. It is often skewed towards the visual because of the way workshops run. Not always. I know doing it properly, that's not the case. But yeah, it's. I like that you mentioned how your agency develops APIs and backend systems, and because APIs are an interface. That's literally what they are. So that should be the focus, and you only develop visual elements or buttons when needed. And the last thing I'll comment on, and that'll be worth discussing, is what we do with data today, because I think that's a more interesting challenge for agencies, where we have so much data, and it can be scoped in the same way that a typical UI is scoped, where it can be bespoke for the stakeholder. So you could identify the different stakeholders and customers and work out what data is important to them and how is it presented and what do they intend on doing with that data, and what do they need to action that data. So that I feel like that is where it is often an afterthought, because sometimes they don't know what data they're even receiving until the project's up and running. Um, so, but I feel like that's where there's more need for like going through user journeys and workshopping ideas and coming up with bespoke solutions that display data in the right way.
we certainly find ourselves storyboarding journeys a lot more now, as opposed to telling the story in a series of screens. It's
Yeah.
really about sketching out the scenarios as the user would travel through them, because many steps in the journey may not have a digital interaction point that is obvious to the user at the time. And that can be when an order fires at a restaurant and you walk through the door and we're detecting that you are close by, or it may be as you're entering an office building, knowing that now is the time to start bringing the temperature down, just in time, so they're using the right amount of energy, not too much, not too little.
Yeah.
um, it's I think it's an ongoing process, and we continue to find ways to build alignment around it.
And what about data specifically? Like, um, it's always tempting just to throw dashboards at people. Is is that? But is that a valid starting point? Developing a dashboard?
The short answer is no. I think that you need to begin with establishing your goals and then understanding how those goals are going to be measured through KPIs,
Yeah.
and then constructing a dashboard that's really tight and focused on those metrics. One thing that both of us know and encounter is that most digital transformation projects fail. According to McKinsey, it's like less than 30% that succeed. And
Mhm.
a lot of times that's because the objectives are nebulous. So you do something like Procter and Gamble is going to be the leader in digital and everything's going to be digitized. Digitizing everything is not an achievable goal. An
Yeah.
achievable goal is something like improving the customer experience at check-in at a hotel. And
Mhm.
those are things that you can work through and take concrete actions and then measure those actions. How long is the wait time? How long does it take people to check out?
Yeah.
And if you can track those specific metrics, you can then improve on them. And that ladders up into an actionable plan, into alignment in an organization around change management, so many other parts that lead to success. And when you're talking about investments in buildings, the risks are so much more significant. And so to create an approach that is successful means being really thoughtful about how you're road mapping, creating flexibility in the technologies that you're putting in place to underlie your future investments, and then collecting a lot of data and only looking at the things that are truly truly helpful. Now, we love having that huge pool of data because it becomes your treasure trove for later artificial intelligence and machine learning. But the dashboard with 40 items on it, I think, should be a thing of the past.
Yeah. And well, it definitely is not in the smart building landscape. And I think maybe it's because that no one's been looking at it from a user experience perspective, from that facility management side. And it has typically
Mm,
been the facility management that is receiving the data. But now there's all these new stakeholder groups that want, some of that facility data, but a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And it's hard. It's a hard problem because there's so many stakeholders, and it's hard to know what's relevant. They don't know what data is available, and it's hard for the technology vendors to know what is relevant to them as individuals. So it's tricky. And then the assumption most vendors make is that everyone needs to know utilization data, but
mm,
there's very little effort put into like the quality control of that data input when it comes to utilization data. So it's almost redundant data because it's not very high quality data. So there's many challenges here, and I think this just focusing on how much this meeting room is utilized as a percentage doesn't actually tell anyone anything that useful, because you sort of know that anyway. If you work somewhere and you're like a manager of spaces, you sort of have a feeling because you're there every day how much your rooms are used. So getting that as a percentage exactly, maybe it helps you win arguments for funding or something like that. But I always use the example: like, are you having too many? Do you have too few meeting rooms, or are you having too many meetings?
mm.
Maybe there's another problem there that is more HR related. not facility related. And that's the sort of gap that's missing. How do we look at the business outcome, not the hard stat?
Right. It would be interesting to compare room utilization versus time in office, especially when there's more optionality now.
Yeah.
You know, if you find that you're driving people out of the office who use this highly utilized room, maybe that's the only room that's sized for their activities, and it's an awful experience.
And even things like a lot of people are tracking, oh, this large 15-person meeting room was only used by 3 people, so that's essentially a bad thing. We don't want that. But I always argue, well, what if that space is just so great? These 3 people came to the office to use it because that maybe they're having a web call and it makes a good background to that client they're meeting with, uh, or they achieve a lot in that they're high achievers doing a lot of output. Who cares what space they use? There's so much. There's always a need for cross referencing data, um, and this is where it gets into that tricky territory of, well, how do we do that? How do we reference facility data with productivity, with happiness of employees, with how they feel about things, without just throwing surveys at them? And if whatever we do, it seems like it's always going to be ad hoc and not standardized because every workplace is different. So I feel like that's the challenge where we're in, where there's other parts that it's easy to think about data because it's all very facility based, like consumption levels. Um, but all of this needs to be thought of in the bigger picture for a workplace and a smart building.
I think it's also interesting to think about the new business models that, or space utilization techniques that something like PlaceOS can open up. So even the very best spaces now may not be used consistently, but you need them for critical meetings. And I expect that we will see more and more kind of ad hoc WeWork renting out of rooms, and that's something that you can do if you have digital access control. If you know the utilization across all of your various platforms, and then can give people access to those rooms, can give people access to the technologies in them, and
Yeah.
then inform your facilities staff when those things need to be cleaned.
100%. And even like internally, like an internal WeWork. So if you're a large organization, um,
Hmm.
you can work from any location and chargebacks can go to the correct department. So we're working with a few clients on concepts around this where it comes back to people tracking. So if we're tracking people automatically, we can have a consumption model that is based on their real-time usage. So when they arrive, we start the clock and we charge them for what they use and what they do. So perhaps they get a day pass where they can just sit in the lounge and they're not being charged for anything. But as soon as they spend 20 minutes in a meeting room or a conference booth, they get charged a little bit more than the day pass. So these are concepts that we're just gluing two things together, like sort of like a consumption model with people tracking, and then it's automatic.
It sounds like a nice to have a couple years ago that becomes increasingly necessary as you have huge fluctuations in the amount of workspace that's being used. I think it's really difficult for all managers to adjust to the idea that sometimes only 10% of the people they used to have in the office are going to come in. And if I, as a manager, am not pressured to confront that reality through, data and costs that hit my department's P&L, then, you know, I may just keep going on my merry way. And, no business can afford to do that these days.
There's two sides to this: the tenant and the landlord. And the
Mm,
tenant is in many cases today negotiating flexible leasing, meaning they can scale up and down as needed. Um, that means if they might want to internally, if they have too much space, sublet it using like their own internal WeWork model. But the other side is if they sort of breathe in and take less space from the landlord wants to enable that space they used to have as co-working. So all of a sudden, people. Uh, People not that long ago, people were saying what a bad business model WeWork is. Well, it made some mistakes for sure, but it's still what we use as the language, like an internal WeWork. It's coming up in almost all of our projects from both the landlord side and the tenancy side, where they either look at it for their own internal employees, or they literally want to have something where they're charging external customers to come and use their space.
And at Monstarlab, we've certainly seen that from the landlord side as well. Tishman, which we worked with, created added amenities with us that utilize unused space to have things like nap pods or a ad hoc yoga studio. And it's a great way to bring those added services while also utilizing their space in a more efficient way that requires a degree of flexibility in their space management that you need a strong digital foundation to do.
Yeah, and one of the tricky things there is like exposing those facilities to all of the tenants in the building, and that's something we've been working on, making PlaceOS multi-tenancy, so you can have like a base building offering that is visible to all of the tenants, but the tenants also have their own solution where they might book their own rooms, for example, their own desks, but see those additional spaces that the landlord has that they've activated because it was vacant space.
And that also opens up really exciting opportunities for multi-use buildings. So
Yeah,
if you're in an office building that also has a hotel, if you can make a reservation at the rooftop bar seamlessly within that PlaceOS experience, I think that's really powerful.
yeah, and that's a great way to end the conversation. I think multi-use buildings, where everyone lives in a multi-use building now. Everyone's had to find space in their home for a whole range of activities, working, education, whatever hobby they've just picked up. So that concept is on top of mind for a lot of people, and these
Mm.
multi-use buildings, commercial buildings, have a lot of value because they could have residential and co-working in the same building. So you can just, instead of work from home, you're working near home, uh, just up a few levels or downstairs in the lobby or whatever it may be. There's just so much opportunity here for real estate and landlords. I just hope they can, uh, you know, not mess it up and do what the market is hungry for.
I think there's just so much pressure that they don't have a choice. Um, there isn't the option to not innovate, especially I think in spaces, because there's been so much disruption in the use of office space in hospitality, in hotel utilization. Everyone is looking for entirely new business models, and I think it requires creative thinking and strong foundations.
I've got one last question for you. Last time I saw you in person was a few years ago now, but you gave me some great sci-fi recommendations. Are you reading anything at the moment?
So, what did I read last? Ooh, um, there is a great book about climate change uh, by Kim Stanley Robinson, and the name escapes me.
Yeah.
If if you give me, well,
You know why I always forget names of books? Because I read them on my Kindle, and you don't always look at the front page, because you always just open it up to the last page you were on. You only need the name when you download the book in the first place.
I constantly have the same problem, and honestly, I just tear through them. I really enjoyed Neil Stephenson's Termination Shock. Um, I think I'm on a climate change kick, and
Yeah,
that's a particularly good one. Uh, the Queen of the Netherlands is a main character.
that's cool.
It's weird. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's what I like about sci-fi is it can take real world issues and look at them from interesting angles, and have scenarios. What if this happened? So yeah, I'd be keen to check that out.
Well, give me recommendations when you think of them.
Okay, well, thanks, Knuti.
John, real pleasure.